Sophia Benhumea and Jose Bayon there. Now, just to remind you that we have the Startup Awards at 1:15 in here, and this is the culmination of a whole year's worth of work. Hundreds of thousands of people applying, so it really is exciting and going to be obviously life-changing for those that walk away as the winner today. Now we're going to look at leveraging AI to optimize talent. Now, as we know, the capabilities of AI are endless, but how can we harness all that power and optimize it to find talent? Here to discuss this, please welcome Sultan Saidov, co-founder and president at Beamery, and the session will be moderated by Zaya Kadirova, director at Teachers Venture Growth. So please give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Sultan. My name is Zaya, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk to Sultan about AI and impact on talent. Quickly, to introduce myself, I'm an investor with Teachers Venture Growth. We are a global investment fund investing in growth stage startups at Series B plus stages, and we had the privilege of leading Beamery's Series C and D. I have the pleasure of introducing Sultan here, who is the president and co-founder of Beamery. Maybe, Sultan, you could start by saying a few words about yourself and Beamery.
Yes, thank you, and excited to be here. So we started Beamery about 9 years ago, and the vision for us from the beginning has been to create consumer-like experiences for talent, for candidates, for employees. And AI has played a really central role in that at every chapter in our journey, most recently with large language models. But it's a really interesting time because it's not just a question of AI and talent in terms of technology, but the way that AI is impacting people and work is making the question of employee experiences, talent experiences really central these days. So excited to be here and excited to talk about these AI overlapping themes.
Great. So you've recently released Talent GPT, and I know that you guys have been testing and trying out different models, OpenAI and others, and sort of figuring out how to use the latest technologies for your own product. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that and how that journey has been for you?
Of course. So the reason that we actually started using AI in the large language model sense was what's known as the talent space as the skills problem. So the majority of challenges for companies in trying to plan how to hire or plan their business when it comes to people is that to do so relies on an understanding of skills. What skills do my employees have? What skills do I hire for? And for decades, every Fortune 500 company has been trying to figure out how to do that and can't, because each company means something different by job titles. If you're a product manager, it means something radically different in construction versus tech. And so trying to figure out what do skills mean in our company, how do we predict it, no one's really been able to do. And we'd been grappling with this question for a couple of years and had some approaches through machine learning. And then in 2018, we started using the first generation of transformer LLMs, specifically Google's BERT. And it helped us make some breakthroughs in building out some predictive models to essentially forecast and track and predict what do skills mean in different companies, how do they evolve. We're in a position where we track a lot of data, so we power talent experiences and planning for a lot of the world's biggest companies, so we have hundreds of millions of candidates in our systems, and it generated a lot of information that we could use to train these models and to use the large language models to essentially predict these insights. And off the back of that, for a couple of years, this is before generative AI, this is before we started looking at the latest generation, but this is the kind of the first transformer large language models. We started making these predictions, and then when generative AI came in, it suddenly opened up a new wave where we could turn this into a very radically consumer-grade experience. If you think about something like Google Maps as a consumer. You pick where you want to go, and it shows you different routes. Simple. If you imagine an equivalent for an employee trying to figure out their career, how do I go from being an account manager to a sales leader? How do I go from being in product support to product marketing? You could, in theory, provide a Google map, but to do that, you need a set of experiences that are skills-based and conversational, and we can now do that. And that's really where generative AI has plugged in a few different phases to really unlock this very consumer-like experience for candidates, employees, and companies.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Maybe if we double-click on that, so you've just touched upon different stages of the talent lifecycle management. Where do you think AI can play the biggest role today and then going forward?
I think there's probably three main buckets of where AI is already playing a big role. The first is people are already using AI in different ways, and the question of how will your work be impacted and whether you will end up losing your job or improving your job, it's already happening whether or not companies do anything. I've recently spent some time at a number of World Economic Forum summits on generative AI and the future of work, and the predictions for how many people's jobs will change are gradually going to everybody's. And the first question of how does that impact talent management is, well, how do we give people visibility? Like, let's say you work in customer support, and companies are starting to roll out AI tools to do customer support. Does that mean that those people's jobs no longer exist, or does that mean that the skills they have in creating content and dealing with tickets can now be redirected or AI amplified? And what's starting to happen is companies are starting to look at this information. You know, our clients include companies that are rolling out these AI tools, companies like Google, Salesforce. And one of the things they're looking at as they roll out their own features for their customers is, how does that impact our own people? How does that impact our users? If we roll out an AI tool, does that change the people we're selling to? And that's all, in the end, talent-centric questions that you need some predictive models to look at. The second is, it's actually equalizing things. If you think about how much of our access to knowledge and opportunities and education is down to access to where we live, where we get a chance to go to school. AI is providing a huge equalizing factor to how accessible high-quality education is. If anyone here is familiar with the Khan Academy, Sal Khan did an amazing TED Talk recently where he talked about how they are using AI to create personalized tutors, something that is highly effective as a way of helping people learn, but requires a lot of privilege and access and money to access for most people. And that access to AI-enabled learning is opening up how many people around the world, you know, in which countries, in which regions, can actually lean into becoming experts in things that otherwise they'd never have had a chance to do. And that's actually changing how much, you know, when you look at the world's biggest companies that employ a lot of people in places like Europe and the US, they're now starting to look in other countries because it's now easier to train and onboard people around the world and not rely on talent in major cities. And the third thing is, it's creating an opportunity for people experiences and talent experiences to rapidly catch up with consumer experiences. And if you think about, you know, the difference between your experience as a consumer when you go on Netflix and you get recommendations and everything feels instantaneous and personalized, and your experience in candidate or employee processes where you apply for a job and you never hear back and it takes hours. That gap has only been widening, and a lot of that is down to the fact that people experiences have been built around process, not intelligent data and consumerization. And AI is starting to rapidly close that gap because suddenly there is an opportunity for companies to give their employees personalized coaching and not just rely on good management. And so I think it's going to make a big impact in the way people think about work, you know, whether or not work is full-time jobs or part-time work, or you being able to start your own business more easily because AI has made that more feasible, which in itself is a big thing. I think is going to be some of the fastest things that we see happening in the next year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. So it sounds like you're seeing a lot of, I guess, benefits of AI, you know, such as providing people the level playing field, providing this roadmap, being able to upskill and so on. What are your thoughts if we maybe focus a little bit on the dark side of AI, or what you've alluded to earlier, fears around people losing jobs and what the future is going to look like for us today? Maybe if you could, talk about what you think about it as BMarie, as well as how do your customers think about it, because you work with a lot of talent management and HR teams at large enterprises globally. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about how your clients think about it.
I think there's a mixture of views and opinions. First, because it's reasonable to be a little bit alarmed at how quickly things are moving, because if you take a comparison with something like the Industrial Revolution, and it's easy to say, well, all of this AI stuff is happening, but we've had technology revolutions before, and it led to higher employment, and everything was okay. And maybe if you zoom out over the course of 10, 50, 100 years, that's the kind of thing that will happen. But if you zoom in on 1 to 5 years, during any phase of the Industrial Revolution when big technology happened, lots of people lost their jobs. You had to put in labor unions, laws, protections, and things that actually ensured that a whole bunch of people suddenly had ways of finding new things. People didn't go from being in agriculture to being in factories overnight. And I think that what's happening now is even faster in terms of speed of impact, speed of how it's proliferating across companies. But it's even more important for a lot of these organizations, and we work with a lot of the world's biggest organizations, the Fortune 500. They can't do this all top down. So they're trying to figure out, how do we bottoms up give people the tools and the empowerment to figure it out, to teach themselves, to train themselves. And obviously there's a big curve of how many companies have figured out how to do that better or worse, but technology is going to be a big part of this. And some companies are also scared around how this impacts their business models. And we've seen a few of the companies that you'd think would be the most quickly disrupted, like Adobe, have managed to lean in and actually almost do the opposite and release some fantastic products. But the speed with which people in organizations and startups like those at this conference can start disrupting big companies, they're not blind to that, and they're, I think, starting to think a lot more deeply around how do we either try to become competitive or rethink our business models. And I'm personally surprised by how rapidly some companies have been able to switch gears. I mean, if you look at companies like Salesforce, they managed to, within a few months, suddenly pivot a lot of their business, release lots of GPT products. Not every business can do that, but I'm seeing people taking this very seriously in terms of rethinking, who is in our business, how do we tackle the business implications, but also the moral implications for thinking about people's welfare.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And maybe somewhat of a provocative question. Are your customers already thinking in terms of, workforce planning and the impact of AI on the workforce planning, either already today or going forward? Are people already thinking in terms of, what our budgets are going to look like, and hiring plans and so on?
So I'll start by talking a little bit about what workforce planning is for companies. So for decades, companies have approached decisions on who we hire through a finance-driven mindset. Most larger companies will once a year come up with a strategic plan in terms of what is our KPIs, what is our objectives, and then decide, well, what is our headcount plan to meet that? Do we have enough jobs open? Do we have a prediction of how many people will leave? And that has no actual thought or ability to think about people as more than just a number or a title, like a product manager. And what's happened in the last couple of years, even before you sort of get to the AI, is that process of trying to plan once a year and think about people not as people but as job titles has just collapsed and not worked. Because after the pandemic hit, firstly, people's assumptions around how many people would leave and how many people would stay went out the window. Secondly, we've seen every company realize that a job title isn't useful. And we were in this interesting position because our clients included the big pharmaceutical companies that were building vaccines, the companies that were doing deliveries around the world, and each of them suddenly realized we can't plan anymore. We actually have no plan. And so this question around how do we plan without planning, or how do we move more quickly, started changing everything. You know, someone producing a vaccine who doesn't know whether they'll be able to have enough people to ship on time, that's a big deal for the world. And you know, there's companies who are at the summit, like AstraZeneca, who started figuring this out and started being more thoughtful around it. And I'm seeing now the role of AI as being really key in this, because what AI is giving us is a way to make predictions and insights about where skills sit and where behavioral predictions can tell us who's likely to get promoted or who's likely to teach themselves. We now see, you know, generative AI tools not only driving people to learn, but helping organizations understand what are people learning. If someone does a course, what does that tell us about how many of our jobs might be filled or work might be done by people who are doing this? We're seeing lots of companies deconstruct work very quickly into what's known as projects or gigs, so you're not just relying on full-time work or somebody starting in a particular job title. And this is happening really quickly. You know, lots of companies are essentially getting rid of job descriptions and thinking about work in terms of skills and tasks, and AI is the thing that's enabling that. The analysis of how do we do that, how do we create work that is skills and not descriptions, and then how do we figure out who can do that. And that's what workforce planning is becoming, this skills-based predictive model that is essentially continuous and has AI tools at its core.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And maybe from the point of view of an employee, so let's say I'm an employee in a company X, and I have these concerns about my future and how should I think about the future and my skills and my job. What do you think I should do? Because you've talked about companies such as Adobe who really leaned into the technology and were able to really harness and use that to their advantage. If I'm an individual person, what do you think I should do to really lean in and take advantage of the technology today?
It's a tricky question, because I think there's so many different things that would be relevant to different people. I think high level, embracing learning and trying things is more important than ever. And there are lots of things that were previously difficult or inaccessible that are becoming possible. I imagine some folks in this room will have seen this year's Oscar winner, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Now that's an example of an incredible film made by a tiny team. They actually used Runway, an AI app, to help make that film. And making Oscar-winning films that were driven by CGI by the small group of people was not long ago more or less impossible. Now it's becoming possible. You know, we've entered a world where the same for other, creative industries like video games, making AAA games, impossible to compete with the big studios, now possible. And I think the same is true at an individual level. You know, there are things that might have previously seemed inaccessible, like the idea of being a non-technical founder and building your own technical app and prototype. A few years ago, impossible. Like, you'd have to learn everything. Now you can just use AI to assist you to actually build prototypes and do stuff. And that's changing a lot of options around how much you can do yourself, how much you can do with a limited amount of resources, and even the kind of businesses you can build. You know, it's a time to be more bold and ambitious about your own development, and also just, who can be disrupted, which candidly is anyone.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Maybe one final question in terms of the maturity of technology today, because you've mentioned that you started working with AI. You were one of the pioneers, really, right? Working with Google's BERT since 2019, and then more recently with other newer technologies. Could you maybe talk a little bit about where are we on the maturity curve, also in terms of the ability to fully incorporate these technologies in the product today? And what do you think needs to happen for this to be fully, big part of your product offering to your customers?
I think one of the things that's not fully appreciated or visible to many people yet is how much our concept of what we interact with, the interfaces of technology, are being changed. On the surface, a lot of people see the latest AI innovations as having a conversation or having a chat. But it's becoming a lot deeper than that, because what we're seeing is the disruption of how much of our experiences have to be interfaces and buttons and clicks, and what does that open up if we aren't restricted by that with experiences that can be embedded in other systems and tools. So I don't think it's just a question of can the models get better at conversation or text. It's how do we rethink experience? How do we rethink what has to be built as a tool or a feature versus what could be built as a nudge or something that is different? And I think we're starting to see people getting more creative and rethinking, product design, not just AI design, and how these things complement each other.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you so much. This was a fascinating discussion. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Thanks a lot, Sultan.
Thank you.
Wow, we're